Hello, my name is CJ. I want to talk to you today a little bit about plagiarism, both pulpit plagiarism and academic plagiarism. Want to give a fair warning, I live in Seattle, and so the windows are open in case you hear a loud car drive by or anything like that. It's the only way to get air conditioning here, so otherwise it'd be really hot, and so I want to give an apology for that in advance. But nonetheless, plagiarism. Interesting topic, especially when you start looking at the differences between being in the pulpit as opposed to being academic. Webster's dictionary actually defines plagiarism as the act of using another person's words or ideas without giving credit to that person. And then in the article we read this week, we read about how the Council of Writing Programs Administration's definition of plagiarism actually reveals several contingencies which complicate the enforcement of academic integrity in higher education, particularly in regards to adult education. That's us. Intentionality is one contingency. Writers' use of the works of others are not always deliberate. And so when we look at these two things, it really illuminates some differences between pulpit and academic plagiarism. Truth be told, for me, I am a youth pastor, and so I get the opportunity to preach a lot. And so kind of an interesting one for me as well, because I've actually had people ask me before, where did I get that, or where did that come from? Who said that originally? And so oftentimes I don't even know what I say. I just start vomiting at the mouth of words. So one of the differences for me between academic and pulpit is that academic plagiarism is kind of it's worse in my opinion, and it is different because in academia it is all based around research, right? There's a discussion, there's a paper that's due, and it's based on this topic, and so you have to go and research that topic. How many of us are actually, the reason we're in school is because we don't know about it, we don't have that degree, and so we want to go and research it. And so we are seeking someone else's wisdom, someone else's expertise on that. And so when we include that into a paper, into whatever, it's obviously not our own words or our own knowledge, and so we need to be very intentional about giving that knowledge and giving that acknowledgement to the author or writer. And so there's a big difference to me between that. Like I said, it's very research based. You are going out to find it. Whereas in the pulpit, hopefully the foundation and the information that you're starting with should be the Bible. And so there's not that you don't pray before you do your homework and seek the Lord to help you with that, but definitely as you're preparing for a sermon, you want to seek the Lord and get His guidance. And so it's a very much an inspired thing. I think of even Peter or Paul in the book of Acts, how the Holy Spirit gave them the word and they spoke it, and it was a sermon and it changed lives. And so they didn't research it. They just, matter of fact, they were actually quoting prophets of old and that kind of thing. And so they didn't have to cite it, they just said it, and people knew what it was. And so to me there's a difference, because one is very much academic and for grades, and the other is not so much. Now, all that to say that if you intentionally quote A.W. Tozer in your sermon, and you know for a fact it's a quote, and you decide not to because you want to receive the glory from that, that's a different story. That's not okay. But I think a lot of times as you're speaking and as you're in the pulpit, that God gives you a word and you say it, it might sound a lot like someone else's interpretation of that. Or even as you are reading through, let's say, the book of John chapter 8 or something like that, and you're reading and you have a revelation. Well, I'm sure at some point maybe someone has had that revelation before, and maybe even written it down, and it's in a book somewhere or something like that. But that's maybe not even without your knowledge. And so going back to that contingency of intentionality, I think a lot of times in the pulpit it's not intentional. I know for me, I'm always very intentional about recording that. And so a little bit of advice, some things that I try and do to help prevent that. I'm also, my brain kind of goes sometimes and I forget things, and so something I've started doing is that when I hear something, I'm like, oh man, that's really cool, that's a cool story, that'll preach, those kinds of things. I try and write it down right away. I try and write who came up with it, where I heard it, all this stuff, and make a notation so that I can go back to it later. And that way you always give reference to it. And I think another big thing, if we're being honest here, the reason why pastors don't mind giving credit and quoting that, hopefully they should be, is because there isn't a grade looming over our head, right? Like, part of a rebel self inside of us says, I don't want to do this APA formatting because I'm required to. But when you're in the pulpit, it's a lot less weight on your shoulders because no one's looking at you expecting you to do that to get a good grade. So if I'm being honest, that's a big help. But nonetheless, writing things down, making notations as to who wrote it, where you heard it, that kind of thing in your journals, what have you. Second way to prevent being, plagiarizing in the pulpit is to expand. Expand your wealth of knowledge, what you listen to, your podcasts, your sermon, your books, that kind of thing. I think it's really important as a pastor to be a learner, both in school as we are, but also as you get into full-time ministry. And as for me, I'm very intentional about trying to read a couple books a year to help that are pertaining to ministry to help me grow and to seek the experience of others. And so I think the more you expand that, the more you begin to be able to quote and pull from different people. And so, those are my 2 ways to prevent plagiarism in the pulpit, and I definitely see a difference, although we should always be intentional about giving credit, and ultimately because nothing is ours, right? Everything is from God, and so He gives us words both from Him and from other people, and we always want to give credit to it. So thank you very much, and have a great day. God bless.